Gospel according to Mark, the 6th chapter.
Glory to you, O Lord.
King Herod heard of the disciples preaching, for Jesus' name had become known. Some were saying, John the Baptizer has been raised from the dead, and for this reason these powers are at work in him. But others said, it is Elijah, and others said, it is a prophet like one of the prophets of old. But when Herod heard of it, he said, John, whom I beheaded, has been raised. For Herod himself had sent men who arrested John, bound him, and put him in prison on account of Herodias, his brother Philip's wife, because Herod had married her. For John had been telling Herod, it is not lawful for you to have your brother's wife. And Herodias had a grudge against him and wanted to kill him, but she could not. For Herod feared John, knowing that he was a righteous and holy man, and he protected him. When he heard him, he was greatly perplexed, and yet he listened. He liked to listen to him. But an opportunity came when Herod, on his birthday, gave a banquet for his courtiers and officers and for the leaders of Galilee. When his daughter Herodias came in and danced, she pleased Herod and his guests. And the king said to the girl, ask me whatever you wish, and I will give it to you. And he solemnly swore to her, whatever you ask me, I will give you, even half of my kingdom. She went out and said to her mother, what should I ask for? She replied, the head of John the Baptizer. Immediately she rushed back to the king and requested, I want you to give me at once the head of John the Baptist on a platter. The king was deeply grieved. Yet out of regard for his oaths and for the guests, he did not want to refuse her. Immediately, the king sent a soldier of the guard with others to bring John's head. He went and beheaded him in the prison, brought his head on a platter, and gave it to the girl. Then the girl gave it to her mother. When his disciples heard about it, they came and took his body and laid it in a tomb. This is the gospel of the Lord.
Praise to you, O Christ.
Well, that is a difficult passage to hear, right? And I will tell you that in seminary, when we are learning about preaching, they say when you have a text that is so challenging and up to lots of interpretations and just sort of hard to hear, you shouldn't ignore it, because people hear these words, beheading and killing and all the things, and then you don't address it, then it's sort of like left sitting there. But unfortunately, because I am only here today, and that's a hard text, and in light of the world and things that are going on, I'm not preaching on that text. So I'm not following what I learned in seminary. But if you have questions about it, you can come to the next Ask the Pastor. And I think somebody would love to answer some of these questions. But also Charlotte asked me today, do you know how to preach? So it may be a while. I have preached on and off at different congregations. But I'm using a focal verse today for us. It comes from Romans. Rejoice in hope, be patient in suffering, persevere in prayer. Rejoice in hope. There is a lot on this July day to rejoice in, right? We can each think of our own things that we're giving thanks for, the sound and beauty of life and children and the joy of raising our families, the sun, produce that's brimming maybe in your gardens, air conditioning, family and friends. Things are good in our lives. There's something, a meal shared with a friend, the bird song, time to gather as a community to give thanks in worship. Rejoice in hope. But there's also, in that same breath, a lot that we can lament about. There may be a lot that we're holding, a lot of sorrow, grief, anger. The world is heavy and hard. Our own lives may be heavy and hard. We may be lamenting a new and recent diagnosis for ourselves or for a family member. Perhaps there's a relationship that is fractured and you're wondering how to salvage it, or if there will be hope for your friendship or your marriage or your time with your family and friends. Perhaps you're lamenting what seems to be an inability to have conversations with anyone who thinks or believes a little bit differently than you. Maybe you yourself have a little bit of what is called compassion fatigue, where there's just too much. You've seen too much, you've done too much, and it's hard to really feel like you care. Perhaps you're lamenting what it was in our church years ago. Perhaps your children or grandchildren are struggling. Perhaps you're lamenting the violence that we see right in our neighborhoods, in our community, in our world. Perhaps you're lamenting the wars that are ongoing. There is much to lament. Too many struggles to count and countless prayers that we're offering. And so we rejoice and we lament. And we can hold both of those. Right? Martin Luther talked a lot about the both and, that we're both sinners and saints at the same times. We can hold both joy and sadness. We can hold that tension of what we desire this world to be and see the reality of what it is now as we continue to hope for peace and wholeness. Both and, rejoice and lament. So perhaps the baby didn't sleep through the night, and you're sad and you're tired and you don't even know which way is up, but then the morning comes and you have friends who drop off coffee for you or who will hold the baby for you. Both and. When you receive the results that your scan is clean, you rejoice. And in the same day or the same week, another friend is not that lucky to have that clean scan, and we lament with them. Both and. Perhaps you gather with friends and you're with your friends and family, you're picnicking, having this wonderful time. It feels like nothing is wrong in the world, and then you turn on the news. You hear of violence. You hear of war. Both and. You can argue over and over again with your children, and then they send an apology text, or they ask, "Will you forgive me?" You can lament the lack of worship attendance or the ways that the church used to be, but then we see the vibrance that we have in our community, our public witness to caring for others, the community online. Both and. Rejoice in hope, be patient in suffering, persevere in prayer. And so, many afternoons, and I know I'm going to put you in a specific place right now that many of you can actually picture, the Cole Camp pool. So there you are, we're all at the Cole Camp pool. Many of you grew up there, or think of your own pool where you grew up if you took swim lessons. So as a family, we've done the swim lessons year after year, and if you've maybe experienced yourself or with your own kids, some kids are just going to jump in the water no matter what, the daredevils. I'm not talking about those kids. I'm talking about the kids that sort of want to wade in slowly. First they get their feet in, maybe then they're just sitting, kicking their legs. Finally, they might get in the water and put their head in, right? It takes time. They need a little bit of coaxing and support. They need to know that you're right there with them. But over time, if you go, the more you're exposed to the water, the more easy it gets. And so I have seen personally with my children and also then children in the community, the growth and the comfort that comes from being in the water, from swimming. But more particularly, I remember what it is to see growth when it's time for the high dive. So we have that high dive there at the Cole Camp pool. Anybody gone off the high dive? Oh, Jace raising his hand. All right. All right. So I'm just going to talk about my kid, but I also spent the last week at swim lessons, and I can say this about every single kid that went and did the high dive. So the first time, a few years ago, Charlotte was going to do the high dive with Miss Terry. She lets them go do the high dive if they want, and so there they are walking over on the concrete, and I asked Charlotte, "Are you ready?" And she says, "I'm just a little bit scared." I said, "Okay." So she goes up there, starts walking up the ladder. So picture yourself, or picture a small child, going up the high dive, clenched fists, not looking down, a blue sky, warmth, your friends, the other classmates, and your teacher cheering for you. You can do it. Don't look down. You got this. Can you picture it? One foot in front of the other, up and up, finally till you're at the tip, the top of that high dive. And I think it feels like we live much of our life there at the top of the high dive. We're scared, but we have to do something. We have to move. We could go back down, which is fearful in itself. But ultimately, we have to go somewhere. We have to move knowing that we don't know what's going to come. We have to know that moving forward, we're going to have uncertainty. We can imagine and think about what it is to be at the top of the high dive. If you're looking down, you wonder what it's like, what it's going to feel like for the first time when you splash down, what the feel of falling through the air will feel like. So I have a feeling I'm not the only one who lives up at the top of the high dive, somewhat afraid of what is to come, life in this world, life in our homes, life with our relationships. But there we are at the tip, a little bit scared. And so there, I saw this all week. The kids, my daughter, all the other kids, they're at the tip of the high dive. They're scared because they're not jumping right away, right? You need to hear the voices of the community. You need to hear your teacher say, I'm right here. Jump. Your friends saying, you got this. At the tip of the high dive, scared, but then they jump. They jump scared. And so in all of our suffering, in our waiting, and in just the day-to-day reality of life, in taking small steps, we more often than not have to jump. We have to see what is to come. We have to let go of control for just a moment and trust that we will be caught. Because we know that those test results are going to come back, one way or the other. We know that there's relationships that may be salvaged or relationships that may take on a new shape and form. Our church may look different, but we get to connect with people online in new and creative ways. We keep sending our children into the world, into schools, sending them away across the country at camps, trusting and hoping that they will be safe. We're a little bit scared, but we're tasked with jumping scared and trusting that we will be caught, and hearing the voices of the community, our friends and family who are cheering for us, who are saying to us, you got this. You're not alone. We're here for you. We will catch you. And this is where I give thanks for community, those who are gathered here, those who are supporting our kids at camp and in New Orleans, those of our family and friends, for when we need a kind word or a shoulder to cry on, when we need someone to sing with us, when we need that homemade meal, when we can't offer the prayers ourselves, when the words don't come, when we received a hand-stitched quilt from the women in the congregation. This is where we're reminded that we are caught, that we are held, that no matter how scared or uncertain the future feels, we can jump scared, trusting that God is with us and that a community of believers and friends and family are there to say, you are not alone. Thanks be to God.